You may know this, but you can collect logbooks of enemies when you kill them. Guaranteed after 60 kills, not 20 kills now, it is 60. Or a random chance that is between 0.9% when an enemy has 1 health, all the way to 15% when an enemy has over 100,000 health, or the same amount. Now this means that you can collect a variety of logbooks. So for example, you might get the Clown, which looks weird, or you might get the Breaker 4, which appears on all game modes. Or you might get glitched ones like this, where the Cavalry appears twice because there's a quote modern variant and quote legacy variant, even though the modern variant is literally just the legacy version, just with updated stats. It's really weird, I know, but did you know that you can collect legacy enemy logbooks? So for example, the Demon here, you can collect its modern variant of the logbook in Pizza Party, and if you go to the Sandbox mode, which is the entire point of logbooks, you're meant to collect the logbooks to get them or spawn them into Sandbox mode. You may see it as an almanac of some kind, but it's mostly added for Sandbox mode, being able to spawn the enemies into Sandbox mode. However, if you have a legacy enemy, for example, the legacy version of the demo or the demon, then you won't be able to spawn it into Sandbox mode. And so for example, all of these enemies here that appear here, you can't actually spawn them in here. I can spawn them in because I have the Admin Game Pass, but for example, you can't spawn in the legacy version of the abnormal. Now for this, there's a very easy bypass. You just go to modifiers, just enable legacy, and go to enemies again, go to modern, and then spawn in the abnormal again. And as you can see, it is now the legacy variant. In fact, it has the legacy variant statistics because that's what the legacy modifier does. It changes it out from the modern variant, or enemies that run on the modern code, to the legacy variant. Legacy really in this case doesn't really necessarily mean old, it just means running on different code, aka legacy code, different to modern code. Most of the time this does mean that the enemy is old, but that's not necessarily because it's old. Legacy does not mean old, it just means different code. Because of this reason, you're not able to spawn in these enemies because the developers have totally intended that you're not able to spawn in legacy enemies even if you have the logbook. So for example, you can get the circuit logbook in hardcore mode because it spawns in there, but you won't be able to spawn it into Sandbox mode unless you have the Admin Mode Game Pass, which costs currently 5,600 Robux, something like that. And there is no intention for this feature to be enabled for legacy enemies, purely because this is an admin mode feature only. Now, some people have argued that if you get the logbook, therefore you should be able to spawn it in, bearing in mind that for some enemies, such as the Enraged, it has like a really old legacy version from like 2021, which is a PvP version, which I should probably get to later. You technically don't have its logbook, but if you get the Enraged logbook, then you're able to spawn in the Enraged enemy. Same thing goes for like the Demons, the Clown, the Deep Freeze. All of these enemies you can't spawn in naturally, even with the Admin Game Pass. You need the modern variants, or the modern variant logbook, to spawn it in. So it's a bit of a conundrum for being able to spawn in legacy variants, because technically, because these are old enemies, anyone without the Admin Game Pass is not meant to spawn them in, so therefore that's why it's been disabled. This has obviously led to a lot of confusion, especially for bosses, hardcore mode enemies, such as the Void Reaver, which even though they're on legacy code, they're not actually considered old by the community because you can still play them in hardcore mode. So, what some people have asked is that some enemies, in fact maybe all of them, that you can get publicly in logbook form, they'll be able to spawn in through admin mode, well, Sandbox mode, but you don't need the admin mode Game Pass to spawn them in. So, for example, it might lead to someone without the admin mode Game Pass, like not me, being able to spawn in the Void Reaver, aka the boss with one of the highest amount of healths in the game. And it's quite a unique boss in that it damages the base from afar. Also has the longest shockwave when it stomps, and has the highest amount of damage to units while it does that. Anyway, some people have asked, this should totally be a feature that you should spawn in enemies regardless if they are legacy or modern. However, that's not going to be the case. I don't see the developers doing that purely because something like the Gold Titan exists, the Golden exists, the Gold Guard exists, and while you can't get those logbooks, it does open up a chance to being able to spawn in legacy enemies that way. So, if developers aren't going to do that, what do I think developers could do? Because bear in mind, legacy enemies also include stuff like the Amalgamation, the Abomination, the Minigunner, the Mimicumbria, which are enemies that people don't really consider a legacy. They consider them modern, and something like What's the Fox also appears in the legacy variant, and it doesn't have a modern variant. So people would really like to spawn these in just for testing. But how do you balance out the fact that these are legacy variants and may get removed at some point to the need or the want of the community? Now, one solution that I've read in my comments, and shout out if you're the person who actually suggested this, but I was also thinking it before, trust me, was that you're able to get the logbooks for these legacy variants. So for example, you can get the Breaker 4 modern logbook, and then therefore that allows you to unlock the legacy variants Breaker 4 logbook. But you need gems or coin, probably gems, thinking about it, like 1,000 gems to spawn or to enable the Breaker 4 to be spawned in. This wouldn't apply to the modern variant, so if you get the logbook for a modern variant enemy, like the Brute for example, you'll be able to spawn it in just fine. You don't need to pay up anything, pay any gems. It is just that for the legacy variants, if you get its logbook, you may need to pay up 1,000 gems in my proposal, or in their proposal, but I also agree, to get the legacy variant of the enemy to spawn in. That way, it entices some people to buy the Adobe Game Pass to get things outright, because buying it with 1,000 gems, that's quite a lot. But we have to be pragmatic about it, because the developers, they're not going to naturally enable legacy enemies for all player bases, so we need to entice them to be able to let the community do it. Furthermore, if you get the logbook and you need to pay like 1,000 gems, it disables the players without the Adobe Game Pass spawning in actual legacy enemies that have been removed, such as the Gold Titan or the Golden enemies, because you can't actually get their logbooks because they don't appear naturally in any of the current game modes. Yeah, you can actually go into game modes and spawn in, say, Golden, Fallen, Molten, but the game modes themselves, they are all actually a admin mode feature, including the ones that are publicly available, even though it says, oh yes, you need to beat Fallen mode once to be able to play the map in the Sandbox mode, which is just not the case. So for example, if you get the Void Reaver logbook, you won't automatically be able to spawn it in, but you can pay up like 1,000 gems in the lobby to enable the fact that you can spawn it in. Now obviously some people will complain that this should be a free-to-play feature. Again, the developers aren't going to buy that, so compromise. We allow the community to spawn these enemies in if they pay 1,000 gems plus they have the logbook. That way it eliminates all legacy leaks, like something like the Enraged, for example, even though I don't know how it's going to work for enemies with the same name, because they share the same entry. Maybe they could apply a block for certain enemies such as the Enraged, the Demon, the Deep Freeze. Basically, event enemies or exclusive enemies that aren't evergreen and you can't spawn it naturally, and just say, look, you need the admin mode Game Pass to actually spawn in these enemies, otherwise you're like stuck with like the original Fallen Guardian that you can spend your gems on to unlock in Sandbox mode. I suggest gems because I don't know how many gems I have lying in my own account, but it's quite a lot. 14,000 gems, so that's enough for 14 logbooks under proposals. Maybe even if you were to do it for 500, that's 28. But it would give needed use for gems, especially because there are only 4 towers in the game that currently use gems, even though I've suggested to the developers, or in video form, to make like something like the Deluxe Crate or the Phantom Crate being able to be purchased with gems, but they don't seem to be able to do that. But more importantly, what I think is the high grade crate should cost gems. No, those are like my proposals to keep both the developers and the community happy for legacy enemies in Sandbox mode without the use of the Adobe mode Game Pass. I personally don't think it's going to happen, but then again, I have been proven wrong and developers have stolen my idea, like moving the Necromancer to hardcore mode, but they did increase the price at the same time, so you never know.